Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the New York Symposium. I'm Diane Sayre, LaRouche candidate for U.S. Senate in New York, and today is July 26th, and we are going to be talking about why the British kill American presidents. Before we get to that, let me just say that the peculiar vacuum we have now with President Joe Biden announcing that he's not going to be running for president again and raising the question, is he really fit to serve out the rest of his term, seems to have created an opening for China, which has begun more bold diplomatic initiatives, including a meeting that they hosted of a delegation of 14 different Palestinian groups, including Hamas, Fatah, the PLO, and others. And they reached an agreement, which I can only guess includes China's willingness to issue credit and funds for massive reconstruction and economic development. But it makes a creation of a Palestinian state a viable option, which is very important if we are going to end this genocidal war of Israel against Palestine. You have to have a Palestinian state with equal power at the negotiating table to an Israeli state. And I think the starting point remains the 1967 UN Resolution 242 for a two-state solution. So that is a huge breakthrough. Remember, Bibi Netanyahu said that he had to fund Hamas to keep the Palestinians divided, and that has now been put to an end. They are no longer divided. China also just hosted a visit of the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, and this follows in the wake of the world diplomatic tour of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who began by meeting with Zelensky, then went to Russia, met with Putin, then went to China, met with Xi Jinping, then attended the NATO summit presided over by a senile Joe Biden, and Orban then met with former President Donald Trump, after which there was a very near assassination attempt on former President Trump when he was speaking at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. And we spoke a bit about that last week. Obviously, all of the stories that we were told by the former head of the Secret Service didn't add up. And as I said, I warned about this on the 1st of July because of the attempted assassination of Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico back in May. Fico was another voice saying that this proxy war of Ukraine against Russia has to be ended. He even sent a video to the NATO conference saying that if Ukraine is allowed to join NATO, this will be World War III, and that he's not sure we're not in World War III now. And I will say that we are in an extremely dangerous escalation where we're now talking about putting intermediate range nuclear tipped missiles back into Germany. All the gains of the arms reductions reached by negotiations between Reagan and Gorbachev are being reversed. And the sanity of certain leaders in the West, I think, is questionable. Now, on this question of the presidency, in 2019, Mark Carney, who was the then head of the Bank of England, addressed a symposium of economists in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and Carney called for regime change, basically making the point that governments which feel obligated to represent their populations should not be entrusted to make economic policy, but that rather it should be left up to the central bankers. The presidency of the United States is a very strong government. It is a constitutional republic. The Constitution says that the purpose of our government is to promote the principle of the general welfare, and our Declaration of Independence says that our government only exists with the consent of the governed. Clearly, for a global bankers dictatorship and a one world digital currency, which is what Carney was proposing at that time, you have to get rid of the institution of the presidency. So I would say, although their policies are very different, that you cannot look separately at the near assassination of former President Donald Trump and the very peculiar way in which Joe Biden was forced to withdraw from the race, and his very odd announcement that he was withdrawing on X, not on presidential letterhead, White House letterhead, and not signed by him in person, supposedly because he was sick with COVID. And then he returned and made a very bizarre speech from the White House claiming that he was doing this for the sake of the unity of the Democratic Party and the nation. Nothing to be said about his health, his age, all the things that are the obvious legitimate questions. And then, in a very undemocratic move, this president endorsed Kamala Harris, his vice president, and she is being rammed down our throats through electronic voting prior to the Democratic convention to be our Democratic Party nominee. Kamala Harris was not on any Democratic Party primary ballot. Now, you would think if they cared to have a government that had the consent of the governed, you'd want to have a candidate that people actually wanted to give their consent to, but this is not the concern. So I would say that we have a real assault on the institution of the presidency right now. I do not think that the danger is over, not only to Trump, but to Robert Kennedy Jr. and even to Kamala Harris, because a violent attack on any presidential candidate would serve to destabilize our nation and put the electoral process in more jeopardy than it already is. So I thought it would be at this moment particularly useful to have my campaign historians, Robert Wesser and my husband, Christopher Sayre, to share with you some work that they have been doing, work that was started by the LaRouche movement decades ago on why the British assassinate American presidents. So with that, please take it away, whichever one of you is going first. I guess it's Bob, is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
So, okay, I swear I did not consult with Diane and what she was going to say, because she just gave a absolutely perfect introduction to this presentation. So, just put this up. Okay, so everybody can see the slide?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, this is a pamphlet that the LaRouche organization, LaRouche movement put out in 1994, and I'll come back to this. It was called Why the British Kill American Presidents, and I'll come back to why we put it out in 1994. But I want to start with precisely what Diane was starting with, which is, this is the famous 1821 John Quincy Adams July 4th address, and he puts forth a global mission. Remember, this is the celebration of the Declaration of Independence. And his point is that this declaration, this is a universal principle for all of mankind. So he says it was the cornerstone of a new fabric destined to cover the surface of the globe. It demolished at a stroke the lawfulness of all governments founded upon conquest. It swept away all the rubbish of accumulated centuries of servitude. So that doesn't mean we get on boats and go all over the world and say, hi, this is all great. It means that ultimately this principle has to dominate the affairs of mankind. No more empire, no more slavery, no more imperialism, no more looting. And that's what the British Empire was, right? It's private banking, precisely what Diane was talking about, private central banking. In this case, it was the Bank of England, the British East India Company. They're the government. They use their power as the government to enforce a policy of what? Looting, slavery, wars, forced starvation, or anything else they want to do. And the new fabric that we created was this idea of precisely what Diane was referring to, which is the Hamilton's conception of a federal system, not just Hamilton, but he's the one that actually was the genius that designed it and created it. Through the consent of the government, of the governed, we have a federal union which can defend itself against the oligarchy and their threats by building up a physical economy based on the development of the human creative mind and artificial labor technology, which could defend the nation and any other nation using this principle and promote technological progress for the benefit of all. So clearly, if that fabric dominates nations around the globe, there's no more empire. It's over, it's finished, it's endgame. So the first presidency is what? Right? It's, of course, George Washington is the first president, but the presidency is designed, at least the first 4 years, by Hamilton with these in-depth 4 reports: report on public credit, report on the National Bank, constitutionality of the National Bank, report on manufacturers. So we hone this thing out. We hammer it out. On the right is John Jay, who, of course, with Hamilton collaborated on the Federalist Papers. It took a lot of time figuring out how we're going to do this so it's actually going to work. And the seat of power that's going to implement and can implement is the presidency. And you say, well, John Jay, wait a minute, that's the Justice, that's the Justice Department, or the Judiciary. And it's still part of the presidency. Jay and later Marshall, they had to figure out how we could make sure that all these things fit in with the constitutionality, with the U.S. Constitution. Members of Congress who were part of this, they're part of the presidency. That's how it works. And this was the first one. So what happens? How did the British deal with this? Murder, assassination. July 11th, 1804, Hamilton is murdered by Aaron Burr. Now, I know he's not a president, but I'm starting this as our case number 1, right? Because Hamilton was 40 some odd years old. You can imagine what could have occurred had he lived in terms of further, perpetuation of these ideas and these institutions. So, of course, there's no lone assassin here. It's not a mystery. It's Aaron Burr, right? A few weeks after Burr kills Hamilton, what does he do? He's contacting the British ambassador on how to break up the United States. Right. In fact, he's arrested for organizing a conspiracy to break the United States up on behalf of his banker slave friends to create some, kind of fantasy empire in South America and Mexico and the southern part, Texas, et cetera. And Burr personally, it becomes the center of this nexus of traders, which are essentially New York and New England merchants and bankers, who basically nearly rip apart the United States in its infancy. So that's the effects of this first assault on the presidency. Okay, so that's case number 1. Let's go to case number 2, Abraham Lincoln. So we have basically a bunch of nitwits, except for John Quincy Adams and some of the stuff that Monroe did and whatnot, but which built the nation despite all the problems and the trees and et cetera. So Lincoln is case number 2. So what's up with it? What's up with the Lincoln administration? What's all this about? Well, Lincoln's revives this mission of the presidency, and he's very explicit about it. If you go back to his, the founding speech that created his mission in life in 1836, the speech in front of the Young Men's Lyceum, he says, the Declaration of Independence, all the American Revolutionary War veterans are dead. It's going to die. Unless we revive this and make this anew, we're going to lose the nation. So as soon as Lincoln gets in, within a couple weeks, March of 1861, He implements the Morel Tariff. The Morel Tariff essentially ends British free trade attacks on American industry. And of course, as people know, within a month of Lincoln being inaugurated, you have Fort Sumter and the British-backed Confederacy attempt to basically break up the United States, a thing that Burr was trying to do some decades earlier. So now I have on the right side here Lincoln's economist, Henry Carey, because the meat of this was the idea, and you can see this quote that we use a lot of Carey: two systems before the world. One looks to pauperism, ignorance, depopulation, and barbarism. The other to increasing wealth, comfort, intelligence, combination of accident and civilization. One looks to war, the other to peace. One's the English system, the other the American system. So they have a very clear idea that they're going to revive this and then make this fabric further spread across the globe. And I got to add this element into it because one of the key ways that we preserved the Union was through the Russians, who sent their navy here in 1863. There's a cartoon on the right there. It's a British cartoon, The Extremes Meet. And that's this ugly Lincoln figure meeting Tsar Alexander II. So a few weeks after Lincoln was inaugurated, Alexander II freed the serfs. So this bolstered the kind of humanist Republican, if you will, faction inside Russia, who also served to make sure that we beat the war of insurrection, beat the Confederacy. But they were very concerned about this, right? Because if you begin to spread this fabric into Russia, big problem for the empire. April 15th, 1865, within days of the surrender of the Confederacy at Appomattox, Lincoln is assassinated. Okay, is there a lone assassin? Is it some crazy guy? Hell no. It's a vast conspiracy. So, of course, John Wilkes Booth, the shooter, is killed by federal troops, but there's 8 other conspirators. 4 of them are hung. There's a 7-week trial. The logistics, the money, et cetera, finances for this whole thing, because it was a big conspiracy, were run out of London by Bullock, who was the head of the Confederate Secret Service, with the complicity of the former Secretary of State of the Confederacy, Judah Benjamin. And this is all in the court documents. I mean, it's all documented. This is not somebody's wild conspiracy theory. So this is directly the British and their Confederate allies killing Lincoln. Unequivocally. Okay, now this is my favorite case, really. Say, what, James Garfield? Like, people, nobody even knows about James. Oh, some crazy guy killed him, right? No, absolutely not. What's the Garfield administration? And there's a bunch of stuff that goes on between Lincoln and Garfield. And Chris might want to say a couple things about that later, but Garfield's administration is a direct project of the same Henry Carey, who's out to end the British Empire, a fellow by the name of Terence Powderly, who has deep connections into Ireland. And remember, you have masses of Irish immigrants now in the United States, and they organize something called the Knights of Labor, which is a union with the intent of organizing the dignity of labor to be allied with pro-growth elements in United States to work together in harmony, right? And this guy in the middle there, Wharton Barker. Now, what's he doing? He's going back and forth to Russia to industrialize Russia, right? Along the lines of, what began around this Alexander II and Lincoln thing. And you look at the quote there, the common work of Russia and America is the dismemberment of the British Empire. Well, that's pretty clear. Robert Lincoln, Lincoln's son, is also the Secretary of War in this administration. And this fellow Blaine, which I'll say something about in a bit. So these guys are out for blood. They are out to destroy the British Empire unequivocally. And that means militarily too, which I'll show. What happens is we're involved, the Careyites are involved in a project to build railroads and develop a modern nations in Latin America. And our key country we're working with there is Peru. the British basically overthrow and run the Chilean government, and they declare war. Blaine says to Garfield, look, here's the problem. There's a machine in New York, and its allies in the Republican Party that contain, this is a quote, all the desperate men of the party bent on loot and booty, ready for any Mexican invasion or Caribbean annexation, looking to excitements and filibustering, and possibly to a Spanish war as legitimate means of continuing political power. These men are harmless when out of power and desperate when in possession of it. So they're very clear of this Republican Party Wall Street faction, right, which is allied with the British and the British central banking system and their looting operations, etc. And I have to throw this in here because remember, a few years earlier is the 1876 American Centennial, where we basically pull together all these wonderful developments of technology and industry and everything that we've achieved in this very short period of time of 100 years under this new fabric of national banking and the federalist system. And we bring all the world in and say, see, you could do this too. Go back to Japan. You can do this in Japan. Go back to Russia. You can do this there. And the guy on the right there is an older picture, later picture of Dmitry Mendeleev, who was there in 1876 and went on then to go back and emulate what we did here to build the Trans-Siberian Railroad, modeled on the Transcontinental Railroad. So this is very dangerous stuff. This is the Garfield administration. September 19th, 1881, a few months after he's inaugurated, he is shot and killed. Well, he actually lingers on for a couple months. It's a whole other story. But he does die. Lone assassin? Not even close. The crazy shooter, and he is crazy, says when he shoots Garfield, he said, I'm a stalwart. That's a faction of the Wall Street Republicans. And Arthur, who is the vice president, is now the president. So it's like the guy just says what he's about. He's also nuts. It's a whole other story with this guy, but he's definitely part of this Wall Street faction allied with the city of London. And I have to say, if you look on the left there, that cartoon again, Alexander II, the one that was collaborating with Lincoln, that freed the serfs, he's assassinated 9 days after Garfield's inaugurated. So there's an all-out attack by the British to shut down this operation. So case number 4, William McKinley. This is a quote, and I'm not going to read the whole quote. I'm going to read the italics because it's just beautiful because it lays out everything we've been talking about. He says, the British free trade may be suitable to Great Britain and its peculiar social and political structure, but it has no place in this republic where classes are unknown, where caste has long been banished, since been banished, where equality is a rule, where labor is dignified and honorable, where education and improvement are the individual striving of every citizen, no matter what may be the accident of his birth or the poverty of his early surroundings. Here, the mechanic of society is the manufacturer of a few years hence. Beautiful idea, right? Under such conditions, free trade, the British system, can have no abiding place here. And the cartoon on the right shows McKinley pushed these protectionist measures to basically protect American industry from free trade. And so there's Bill McKinley on the right and his bill to protect on the left. And the title of the cartoon is The Two Bills. So what's going on while McKinley's in there? We are involved in helping the Russians construct this Trans-Siberian Railway directly. Machine shops are developing, forges are creating manufacturing of rails. The Baldwin Locomotive Company in Philadelphia, that's actually a picture of one of their, it's called the Class X steam locomotive, which has sent many of them to Russia to be part of the Trans-Siberian Railroad. Here's a little fun fact: 27,000 American workers were engaged in that part of the work alone. Westinghouse is involved, New York airbrain companies, etc. So we're deeply involved in the modernization and the industrialization of Russia. And something that people don't maybe are not aware of, there is a very serious in-depth study by the Army Corps of Engineers for what's called the Intercontinental Railway Survey. So they are tasked with, and this is just one of many, many maps. And I put it up here because you can see this is all spec'd out. This is ready to be built. This is not just some pie in the sky thing. So what's the idea? You have to figure out how to connect the United States, North American rail system through Central America with the Southern Hemisphere. That's our conception. That's the real Monroe Doctrine, right? No imperialism, no slavery. We're going to bring people into a modern way of life and a better way of living. So that's live. That's going on. And I love this little logo up in the left. McKinley organizes in 1901 the Pan American Exposition. And you see these, I guess they're like two angels. You have the North American angel and the South American angel. And you look at that. Isn't that beautiful? They're holy hands in Central America. So that's the idea. That picture is the speech that he gave. And the next day, he's shot right there, September 6, 1901. He's assassinated. Okay, so what is this? A crazy lone assassin? Hell no. The whole thing is organized out of the Henry Street settlement, which is in New York, ostensibly, but the whole headquarters of the anarchist movement is in, guess where? London. Emma Goldman is a central part of it. The shooter is the guy on the right there, Leon Segols, who basically said, avowedly is an ally of Emma Goldman and the anarchist movement. On the lower right there, you see their paper that they put out, which is printed in London. Henry Settlement was set up by, you may not know who these people are, but Sir Ernest Cassell was the personal banker of the crown of Henry Albert. Albert. Who am I thinking of? The seventh. Albert, Prince Albert, and Jacob Schiff, who was a Wall Street banker who financed these anarchist movements and was in very large way responsible for promoting the Japanese in the Japanese-Russian War of 1904, which was out to destroy Russia. So Goldman is arrested. That's her mugshot. Unfortunately, she, they can't pin her with the assassination, so she's not convicted. But there's a lot more to this. There's a whole nexus of people involved with the Fabian Society, et cetera. But again, organized out of London unequivocally. And of course, who's waiting in the wings? I mean, they don't kill McKinley in the first term. They kill him in the second term because by then they had Theodore Roosevelt as the vice president. And who's he? He's a nut. He calls himself an Anglo-Saxon race patriot. He's in personal correspondence with the King of England. His ideas, we're just going to be like the British. You see this thing, right? Look at the cartoon. Walks off, carry. This is the corollary of the Monroe Doctrine, right? Oh, forget that. We're the new empire in the Western Hemisphere, right? And he becomes the president, and you have complete disaster because you have Roosevelt, you have Wilson, you have World War One. It's a complete mess. Okay, number 5, John F. Kennedy. Now, I'm not going to go into a whole big thing about this. I will just say this. Kennedy, essentially, at a certain point, and this is not just when he became the president, he decided that he was going to commit himself to ending imperialism, right? If you read his Strategy of Peace, which is a series of speeches that he gave when he was a senator, he was known as the anti-imperialist senator. I mean, he took the heat from the Republicans, from the liberals when he defended the Algerians and called for Algerian independence. He was known as the senator from Africa. Anybody that came to Washington, D.C. from an African country would immediately go to the Kennedy Senate office. They knew they had a friend there. On the right is the American University speech where he lays this vision out. We can work with Russia. We have a common aim of mankind. And he was clearly going to revive the whole FDR tradition of ending colonialism. That's him with Eleanor Roosevelt at the bottom. November 22nd, 1963, everybody knows the story. He's assassinated in Dallas. So now, this is where people actually become stupid. And they think after all these other cases that somehow there's going to be some lone assassin, right? So, but they do a good job of the cover story and people buy it. But the whole thing is people may know there was a trial that was prosecution that was created by Jim Garrison, who indicted Clay Shaw for part of the conspiracy to assassinate Kennedy. Shaw was part of this Permindex operation, which was created by the British and their allies in Europe. Major Lewis Mortimer Bloomfield. I'm not going to go. We have lots of documentation on this, but this is a British operation from the top down. That picture on the bottom is the Marine Corps', Lee Harvey Oswald, who was the spook of all spooks. I mean, he was a right winger and a left winger and a communist and and as he said, I'm just a patsy, and he was just a patsy. But because there was missing evidence, which we actually got a hold of later, a photograph. If Shaw would have been convicted, there would have been further investigation because Permindex was known to be part of several assassination attempts on Charles de Gaulle. But again, totally organized out of London and Canada. Okay, now, Ronald Reagan. This is my case number 6. And this is the key to the whole thing. Reagan's elected. What does he do? His anti-Kissinger, anti-Wall Street people that support him, because he was very anti-Kissinger, call up LaRouche, say, hey, LaRouche, come on in. We got a job for you. You can work with us on Russia, on the Soviet Union. We want to go with your idea of being defense. Now, of course, with Lyndon LaRouche, you don't just get it's the whole package. LaRouche, of course, was put forth in the 1970s the plan to end all imperialism on the planet with the International Development Bank. And the beam defense was part of that as a technological revolution. So that's really dangerous stuff from the standpoint of the empire. March 30th, I remember this within, a month of his being inaugurated. I mean, the bullet missed his heart by a couple centimeters or millimeters. So this is a 1981 Donald Trump moment. I mean, he almost was killed. It was very, very, very close. Okay, lone assassin, right? Oh, this part I forgot, yeah. And as part of that attack on the presidency, in 1982, Kissinger fires a letter off the FBI saying, you got to get this guy LaRouche. Get him out. Take him out. And of course, LaRouche's offices are raided. He's sent to jail, etc. Anyway, the shooter, John Hinckley Jr., son of John Hinckley Sr. The Hinckley's there pictured are big public backers of George Herbert Walker Bush. They fund his campaigns, etc. Apparently, the night before Hinckley shot Reagan, his brother was supposed to have dinner with Bush's son, Neil Bush. Who knows? There's a lot. I put the question marks there because none of this was ever fleshed out. But it's suspicious as hell. This is not just some guy that walked out of the middle of nowhere and decides to shoot the president. Okay, now this is very important. Case number 8, Bill Clinton. Now, Bill Clinton, because of his stupid wife and et cetera, has a bad rep. But Bill Clinton, when he came in, it's very, very important. He's the one that made sure that LaRouche got out of prison. Why? Because the Soviet Union was collapsing and they needed a Russia man who knew Russia, to work with the Russians on how we could actually further the advancement of mankind, of civilization. So as soon as LaRouche is released, he's within a month in Moscow. That's what those two pictures are. That's a EIR magazine, R. LaRouche's publications from 1992. And you see, we're talking about the Eurasian land bridge. So it's all there. Now, of course, this is the death to the British Empire. Internal development of the internal regions of Eurasia, basically cutting off control of the choke points through which the British have run the world for over a century now. And that's what was going on with Clinton. And Clinton was, through a mediator, in contact, constantly getting advice from LaRouche. Not personally, they didn't meet, but that's actually how it functioned. And that's extremely dangerous. So you don't hear about it, but there were multiple, over 100 attempted assassinations that were thwarted against Clinton. And some were very, very public. This crazy person, Larry Nichols, who would get up and wave his gun and say, I'm going to use this gun to kill Clinton. I mean, this was going on all the time. And these things were essentially thwarted. And, we played a central role in that. That's when we put out this pamphlet, Why the British Kill American Presidents, in 1994. Because we knew that if Clinton would, like Reagan, would go with LaRouche, but fully, then essentially we could have Russia, China, the United States working together, end the wars, end imperialism. It would be a completely different world. And when Clinton came under attack, we hit the streets with that pamphlet on the left, Stop the Assault on the Presidency, because it was an attack on the presidency's ability to create peace and development for mankind. That's what was going on. And we did a whole flow chart of the people involved, the Hollinger Corporation, Daily Telegraph, the Spectator, London Spectator. We'll come back to that. But I'm totally convinced that the reason they didn't ultimately get Clinton is because of what we did. We made it very, very difficult for them to kill him. Gee, no cases here. Nobody tried to kill these guys. Maybe they did. Why? Because they're pro-empire scumbags, all of them. That's why. So maybe there was, at some point, we warned about an assassination threat to Obama just because they would try to make him a martyr because he's black and all this kind of stuff. But you had George Herbert Walker Bush, Barack Obama, W, all pro-British, pro-war scumbags. No threat there. If anything, they helped to destroy the presidency. And then we get to the last case, Donald Trump. There's Donald Trump in China with his buddy, Xi Jinping. That's from the first presidency, of course. There he is with Putin, with Xi again. He liked these guys. He said, I can work with these guys, So on the right there is, again, The Spectator, the same publication that ran the attacks and threats against Clinton, the Clinton presidency, right? So that's just as before, or at the time where Trump is being inaugurated. You can see the headline. Will Donald Trump be assassinated, ousted in a coup, or just impeached? And of course, we know the story of what occurred. I mean, the minute the guy got in there. Oh, and this I want to throw up too, because of course, Xi Jinping came in 2013 and started the Belt and Road Initiative. So the idea again would be, if the presidency links up with Russia, China, and then ultimately India, you end the wars, you end the empire, and this new fabric spreads the surface of across the globe. And it's spread mostly across the globe. That's the irony. So the battle is over the U.S. presidency. We put out this report, the LaRouche movement. Robert Mueller is an immoral legal assassin. He will do his job if you let him. This is the guy that ran the investigation against LaRouche. attacking the presidency then, and then ran this so-called Russiagate BS. And we put and I think this was had a large reason to do why they couldn't really get away with an organized assassination. I'm just saying that. And then we have July 13, 2024. So now I have to get rid of it. I want to read this. This is the paragraph I put in the email for this. This is from the New Federalist article that we put out on July 1st. It's a little section on why Diane Sayer is warning about the threats against Trump. So what does she say? Sayer says that Trump's rejection of the British imperial agenda, as when he pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord, and now his publicly stated view that it was NATO and the West which provoked Russia's actions in Ukraine, stating truthfully that Ukraine is not winning this war and that he could end the war in a day, has provoked hysteria among the global elites who are depending on these policies of war and depopulation to keep their system together. In addition, Trump has repeatedly said that he questions the purpose and need for the NATO alliance, and it's hinted that he would be willing to pull U.S. support from NATO. Most importantly, he has said that he sees no reason why he cannot sit down with both President Vladimir Putin of Russia and President Xi Jinping of China, both of whom know me and respect me, to work out problems and deals. That he might do that terrifies sections of the global elite. So again, as we saw with McKinley, as we saw with Garfield, as we saw with Lincoln, it's the potential. I'm not saying that Trump is a Lincoln or a McKinley, but since the majority of the planet has already kind of adopted the new fabric of the American Revolution, that if we retake the presidency, it's endgame. It's all over. A year and a half ago, the LaRouche movement put out the pamphlet on the left, Stop NATO's World War, Dismantle the International Assassination Bureau. In the center is, of course, Diane's warning, our leaflet, a near miss for our republic. And then on the right, there is a excellent article, peace initiative, by the ambassador from the Russian Federation of the United States, Anatoly Antonov. And who did he come to make sure that gets published? Us, the LaRouche Movement Executive Intelligence Review. So I'm ending this with, what are you going to do? People, what are you going to do? You're going to sit around and wait for November? You think that your voting is going to determine anything? If you get it all what I'm saying here, you're going to work with us because we know how to shut this stuff down. And we can get out the warnings and expose who's behind it and do the intelligence like we did with the Clinton thing, like we did with the attacks against Trump. So you should join the campaign, get out in the street, get the material out, make it impossible for these bastards to do this again. So this whole idea that we're going to, okay, now I'm going to all just vote for Trump. As Ray McGovern said, what evidence do you have that Trump's going to be alive on election day? So that's my challenge to our listeners. That's it for me.
Well, thank you very much. So I will yield to Chris. Your thoughts?
Well, I wanted to. I have some thoughts about this in terms of what Bob just went through. I mean, if you think about the way that the United States is presented, especially by the so-called left or the people that would tend to criticize the United States and say, well, it's not the republic that it was founded to be. It's imperfect. It's flawed. Well, on the one hand, that's true, and we haven't lived up to our mission completely. I want to just point out the implications of what Bob just went through. I mean, we did vote for good people to be president. we did vote for good people to be president. And had they not been assassinated, had they been able to be president, things would be a bit different in the United States and around the world. I actually did make one slide, and I want to share the screen. Hold on for 1 second. Hold on for 1 second. I have to. Okay. Okay, so here's just a timeline that I created while listening to Bob's presentation. And it's a thought object for people to consider. First, as Bob indicated, Hamilton dies in 1804. He's 47 years old. Imagine he had lived to be 80. All right, so say he lived until 1837. 1837. His first national bank was taken down. Would it have been able to be taken down by Madison, by President Madison, had Hamilton been alive? We don't know. It's an important question. He certainly could have fought vigorously for the continuation of the second term of the national bank to be started again. Then you look at Lincoln. Lincoln, well, actually, I want to say even before him, Harrison, President Harrison came in after the treasonous presidencies of Jackson and Van Buren, which took down the second national bank. Now you could say, okay, would they have even been elected? Would John Quincy Adams have gotten a second term had Hamilton lived and been able to fight for the national bank, which Monroe restored? Actually, Madison restored right in the end, and then Monroe used to do some serious nation building of canals and great projects in the United States, which JQA then massively expanded. Would he have been elected a second term? Who knows, right? But then Harrison was going to bring in a third national bank, and he dies from going out on a walk and catching pneumonia, and his doctor bleeds him and all kinds of stuff. I don't know who his doctor was. I don't know what his intentions were. But what I do know is that Harrison, who was a nationalist in favor of a national bank, was forced to bring in Tyler, who was a states' rights anti-national bank vice president, and Harrison was gone within a month of his presidency, and Tyler comes in, and no third national bank, nothing. A commitment to the Confederacy. Okay, so could the Civil War have been avoided? Could slavery have been defeated through economic policies developing the South? These are all questions. Harrison wasn't assassinated as far as we know, but just a thought object had he lived. Okay, Lincoln, 1861. He dies in 1865, assassinated in 1865. He would have lived until 1869. Johnson would not have become president. Reconstruction under Lincoln would have gone on. Remember, he's assassinated just a few days after the surrender, and he would have gone on with Reconstruction in the South along the lines of what he did with the Transcontinental Railroad. He's building the Transcontinental Railroad in the middle of the Civil War. The thing is completed a few years after, but he's working on that. What kind of economic development would have gone on in the South? Grant, who was president, he would have become president immediately after Lincoln. There wouldn't have been a Johnson. So say Grant's in there, but Lincoln's able to actually set forth the American system principles of economic development to bring the South out of this backwardness of a slaveocracy. Grant is an anti-Ku Klux Klan president. He's an anti-slavery president. He's a patriot, but he didn't quite have the conception that Lincoln had in terms of Reconstruction. That could have been solved. Grant could have continued that for 8 years, and then who knows what would have happened after Grant in terms of the presidency. But would they have had to make a compromise with the South in the 1876 election? There may not have been any necessity for that. The Reconstruction could have been well on its way. So Garfield, 1881, he lives a few months. He's committed to national banking. He's committed to protective tariffs against the British Empire. He's committed to the development of the nation. What if he had lived for 2 terms? 1889. Blaine, his Secretary of State, is thrown out by Chester Arthur. Blaine, who had the same kind of vision that McKinley had in terms of cooperation and development with Latin America, and of course, and the people around him like Wharton Barker, who are making all kinds of deals with Tsar Alexander II, who's assassinated almost immediately after Garfield's assassinated. What's he doing? He's building railroads in Russia. He frees the serfs. He's building railroads. He's developing the Russian economy in cooperation with the United States. He was one of the key people that made sure that the Civil War was won by the Union. Right, Alexander II committed Russian ships, the Russian Navy, to defend the U.S. Union against the British and the French. Well, how was he repaid? He was repaid with an assassin's bullet. And this was organized out of London by anarchist networks, but are also backed up by very reactionary right-wing networks who don't like the fact that Alexander II is freeing the serfs and developing the nation, the boyars, as they're called in Russia. Totally against Alexander II. Okay, so Blaine dies in 1893. Could he have been a one-term president after Garfield? What would that have meant? McKinley, 1887 to 1901, he's assassinated. What if he had lived until 1903 and completed his term? As Bob pointed out, great projects in cooperation with the Pan-American movement. No Teddy Roosevelt, no Spanish-American War, no subservience to the British Empire. What would that have meant for Woodrow Wilson? What would that have meant? We don't know. These are all questions. FDR dies in 1945, exhausted. Who comes in? Truman. Winston Churchill, the Cold War. What if he had lived until 1949 and there was no Truman and Eisenhower came in under different circumstances? Eisenhower was not a bad man. He was not a bad president. He was against the military-industrial complex, as we know. He was against the Cold War. He was, he was in the Cold War, but he didn't like it. He fought in World War II. He knew that the Russians were our allies in defeating the Nazis. Kennedy, 1961 to 1963, 2.5 years he's president, a little over 2.5 years. What if he was president until 1969? The space program, cooperation with the Soviets on the space program, the end of the Cold War. If there were a Cold War, imagine if there were no Cold War and you could just have his progress. And then what if his brother were president instead of being assassinated in 68? What if his brother were president for 2 terms? The country would be completely different. We wouldn't be an empire nation. We wouldn't be committed to the British Empire. We would be the American Republic that we were founded to be. So I think when you think about the problems that the United States faces, the issue of, why the United States is not what it should be, consider it's because they've killed our great leaders who we elected to do good things and to move the nation and to move civilization forward. So those are my thoughts on on Bob's excellent presentation, and just get people to think about this. 1 inch a couple of weeks ago, 1 inch difference, and President Trump would not be the nominee for the Republican Party to become president again. Who would be the nominee? We don't know. Would it be a pro-war neocon that the Bush-Cheney gang, the Pompeo gang, who was also at the convention? Would it be, why was Pompeo at the Republican convention? Trump would not have been alive at the Republican convention. What were these people planning to put in his place? And consider ourselves fortunate that that was not successful. It was not a successful operation. But again, it puts all the more, people shouldn't take a sigh of relief at that point and say, "Phew, we dodged a bullet." People should take into their minds what Bob said. What are you going to do? What are we going to do? Now, don't cheerlead for leaders. Become a citizen and organize for what the nation must become. So that's what I would add.
Thank you. That's exactly the point, because also these leaders are quite short when you look at the statesmen that we've lost. There is no one today running for president who has the understanding of the principles of physical economy, the actual American system that Lyndon LaRouche did. And one thing that I found very striking about the LaRouche-Reagan period is the relationship between the US and Russia. Had the Russians, the Soviet Union then, not rejected that proposal, but had understood it from the standpoint of physical economy, as opposed to thinking about it from a military perspective. And I think partly they did, because I think the reason that the Soviets rejected it is they said, we saw what happened with the US economy under the Apollo mission, that you got all of these massive spin-offs and your economy took a major growth spurt. $10 to $14 back for every dollar spent, but it wasn't dollars. It was Teflon, Velcro, microwaves, laptops, cell phones, all of these things that greatly improved the standard of living and the purchasing power of the average American family. The Russian or Soviet system, which went bankrupt for good reason, was not set up to assimilate those things. So they became so fearful of losing the Cold War, they rejected it. They actually called for LaRouche to be imprisoned. They actually produced a film blaming the LaRouche movement for the assassination of Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme in 1986. So this was an opportunity really missed, because and I think the leadership of Russia now, not merely Putin, but top economists like Sergei Glaziev, who had enormous respect for Lyndon LaRouche, people on the Russian Academy of Sciences have a better understanding of physical economy. They're acting on it. Generally, there's still a big fight within the banking policy in Russia. But what kind of partnership would have developed had the US and the then Soviet Union jointly worked to develop the Strategic Defense Initiative? And what might we be doing today in terms of laser defense or thermonuclear fusion energy, etc. It just occurred to me, did we get our astronauts off the International Space Station? Remember, they were about to be stuck there. And I was thinking, we depended on Russia with this, is it Soyuz? I can't remember. That's what it's called, right? To get our astronauts to the International Space Station. And now we're all supposed to believe that they're our number one enemy and we're supposed to destroy them. So I think the LaRouche-Reagan potential for work with Russia, and then Clinton also obviously interested in that. Bill Clinton, I will say, not his wife. This is something very natural. It's part of John Quincy Adams' vision that the American system, which wasn't American, it was universal. The idea that because human beings are created equal, that our government must be based on the consent of the governed, that there must be self-government. That was something that could have spread to the whole planet. And now it is spreading to the whole planet, except we're on the wrong side.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I really wanted to get across because that's how close we are to winning. And that's why the enemy is so desperate. Because as John Quincy Adams laid out, this fabric of the principles of the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, the general welfare, this is spread to most of the planet, 2/3 of the human race. So their last stand is the US presidency, as the way that I just laid it out. So they're desperate, absolutely desperate, which is why every person weighing in, every American citizen weighing in on this is absolutely critical.
Yes, and that is why Jose Vega and I are running as LaRouche candidates in the state of New York. And the state of New York has a very important role to play, as it did historically. And LaRouche knew that, which is why he reestablished or established his Manhattan Project a decade ago. This is the 10-year anniversary of LaRouche's Manhattan Project. So it'd be an appropriate year for LaRouche candidates to get into the Congress. Is there anything else?
That's good.
The dog is saying it's time to go.
Good.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. I hope this gets wide circulation. I'd encourage people to share it everywhere. If you want to support my campaign, you may donate at sareforsenate.com or sign up to volunteer. It's only 3 months, just over 3 months, about 3 months and a week and a half or so until the November elections. And frankly, if you look at the pace of events, that's going even faster. So the more that we can be visible right now, I will say that on Monday night, we will be having the second of a Zoom conference call of myself, Jose Vega, and the leaders of various intelligence agencies retired. I think Ray McGovern is going to be joining us this week, but that is a discussion to help the American citizens to get a more solid understanding of the strategic situation, to be able to act upon it and to deliberate. We don't just want to take little factoids and run with them or fall into the binary track of how you're supposed to think about things. Are you for this, against this, up, down? Just being categorized and put in a box. It's a complex situation, and the best way to deal with it is to think about where we need to be in the future and how to get there. So I'd like to encourage everyone, watch for the emails for the call Monday night at 8:30, and please sign up, donate, and volunteer. And thank you very much. And with any luck, we will see each other on Monday and then next Friday. All right, I think that means it's over.
Okay.